Addison Trail is celebrating their 50 years. We're all excited to bring you some perspectives from a faculty standpoint. Stay tuned to watch some of the activities that they participated in. Hi, I'm Burke McDonald. I'm an ex-faculty member at Addison Trail High School. I was in the guidance department, counselor and the guidance director, and we're going to be talking a little bit about athletics over the 50 years at Addison Trail. Now, we're working with people that have retired, and I know that there's still a lot of athletics going on, and maybe down the road we can put together a piece about athletics currently and with teachers that are of a different age than the one of us here. But we're trying to do something from a retirement point of view. So let me introduce again Chuck Morgan, Larry Weck, Jim Mortier, Kevin Corey, and Rick Howitt. These people have all worked at one time or another within the athletic department, either as a coach or an athletic director. I guess down in that department, driver's ed was tied into that too, right?
Right.
So again, you taught people how to drive their cars properly, and hopefully all of you that learned from the driver's ed people at Addison Trail are still driving very well. And we'd like to talk a little bit about what it was like to be a coach at Addison Trail, especially, we'll start with you guys that were there at the beginning. You were working with kids coming or students coming from two different schools. They probably came from a little bit different philosophies in coaching from the two different schools. And you had to blend them together. And even in the first year, there was a fairly successful year for our students in the athletic area. What was it like that first year?
Well, I was wrestling coach, and I had the freshman wrestling team. Tony Parks was our head coach, and that first year we had a fella come over from York. He won a state championship for us. Rick Bobus won a state championship in wrestling. My team didn't win a meet all year. The second year, I had a great group, and this is funny. 2 state champs came out of it, and Vic Lesh had a big athletic assembly, and I got out there to talk, and I said, give me a group like this again next year, we'll win the state championship as a team. And I'll never forget, after it was over, Vic came over and says, can I get that in writing?
So you were in football at the time. You were coaching football, right?
Yes,
now that's a very integrated team sport with a lot of people, and a lot of people think they should do it this way or that way. What was it like working in those first couple?
It was difficult at times, but thinking about our first teams, we had some pretty big kids. May not have been the most talented, but they were big. And the rest of the conference was pretty well established. So you were up against experience versus kids coming together. But overall, it worked out pretty well. I mean, it wasn't a hard thing to do. And I also started in gymnastics, not ever being a gymnast. And that was great. I mean, I learned a lot.
Okay, that's a good question to ask, because a lot of times, Dr. Weck, you assign people to having to do jobs, and you needed to have a coach for every one of the different sports, right?
Correct.
So sometimes people got put into positions that they didn't have a lot of background in. How do you go about learning how to do gymnastics?
We had a good, experienced head coach, Jerry Jacqueline, and as long as you were willing to learn from him, and the other guy that was his assistant was Bill Verkus, who's in the math department, had no experience either. So, and the kids were coming in, they were green. There were a few seniors that had previous experience, but overall you were teaching the basics, and you yourself were learning the basics. It was fun. I mean, the smile on the kids' face, the accomplishments that they did, and overall, that's how I started, and gymnastics grew at Addison Trail.
After we're done with this, can we take you over to Addison Trail and show you how to do the balance beam?
You bet. Wrong guy.
Kevin, what was it like coaching?
Well,
you worked at many schools, more than
Yeah.
one, all three of the
Right.
District 88 schools.
Right. Well, it was just as Jim says. I went into wrestling, and I went into football. Well, football I had played and all, but wrestling I really didn't know anything about. And Charlie here and
Tony Park.
Tony Parks. Age is catching up with me. I can't think of anything. But anyhow, Tony Parks and Charlie worked with me, and I was willing to learn, and it worked out okay.
Well, that's good. Now, you came in, as you said, later on in the career of Addison Trail. You followed Coach Holka, who was pretty well liked, pretty well respected. In fact, you coached with him, didn't you?
I did for 13, 14 years.
Okay. Well, what's it like when you move up to become the head coach and now it's all your responsibility?
Well, I mean, meeting Frank, and you mentioned Frank before, I think he's one of the founders of this school.
Right, he
and
was.
so when I met him, it was a big highlight for me to know him over the years. He was just a great mentor, I think, to me for sure, and I think to Paul Parpet and Mike Kincannon and all of that, those people. Frank just had a way about him. He had experience, and he had a great way of teaching kids and teaching coaches, and he was terrific. And I remember I hadn't met him when I first got there in September. He was in the English department. And so my first practice, I was sophomore coach or freshman coach. I can't remember what my first year. So I'm pretty excited. I played basketball, and so I was pretty excited to have my very first practice. And I had all the practice plan down on paper. And one of the very first drills I did was the 3-man weave, which is a basic basketball drill. And so the kids
We're
are
not
going
talking
through it.
home X there where they're weaving thing. This is
This is on
This
the,
is
on the
on
court.
court, okay.
3 guys trying to make a layup at one end and then make a layup at the other end. So I'm not even done with the drill. And it's like 3:15, the practice has just started. I get this guy is tugging on my arm, and it's Frank. And he was over on the varsity court because I think my first year he had given up the head job and he was working with Dick Campbell. Dick Campbell came in
Right.
at the same time I did. And he's tugging on my shirt, and he said, "I'm Frank Holka," and we hadn't met before. And he said, "I don't understand the purpose of that drill. You'll never have a game where the players are going exactly like that." And I go, "What? I've run this drill, I've done this drill in college and high school for 15 years, and that's the first thing I learned about Frank, is he was a very practical person. But he became, when I got the head job, and Larry was nice enough to give me the head job, Frank was my assistant. And so for 12 years, I think it was just Frank and I, and we spent hours together, watching film, plotting practices. And I know Frank went through 8 years of being the head coach, and he told me all the stories about him, how the first year they won no games. The second year they won, I think, 2, and then he went 4, then he went 8, then he went 16, I think. I mean, he just established the
Kept building
program.
it, right.
He built the program, and then I think his last year, he had a team that was 14-2. And then he always told me about this guy that his best player got hurt and missed the rest of the season, and they went straight downhill. So we had this hopes of winning 20 games or 22, but it didn't work out at the end. But he was a great basketball guy, just a great guy.
Charlie.
Rick, tell him about Frank's ties.
Oh, yeah. He had a superstition, and he always wore, loud ties, but he always wore the colors of the team that we were playing.
Right.
So if we're playing Morton, he wore some kind of maroon. If we're playing Hinsdale South, it was a black and gold tie, whatever it was, Willowbrook.
Didn't he coach golf too, didn't he?
Yes.
He coached golf
Now,
for a long
you
time.
mentioned that was one of our early success stories. Was he the coach of that?
Yeah, they won the championship of the conference.
Of the conference, and that was a pretty big deal back.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
It was our first one.
Yeah.
That was the first conference championship?
What's it like coaching? Did you only just coach basketball? Did you coach
Later on, I coached some golf and tennis.
Okay, and you've coached more than one sport too.
Oh, yeah.
What's it like having to, is it tough switching mentally, going from one season to another season and preparing while you're doing your other season?
I mean, while I was coaching, the head coach, I didn't coach anything else. But later on, I taught for, I guess it was 14 years after I gave up coaching basketball. Then I coached the other sports. So I never did more than one in a year. That would be hard, because you put your heart and soul into one season, and then it ends, and then you have to jump right into the
Right,
next
I would think that would be tough. Do you
Yeah.
remember?
Well, the sports that I coached in high school, I had participated in each of those in college, so it wasn't that tough to kind of step in and, know, at least try to know what you were doing and so on. Yeah, after wrestling, I took off 5 years to watch my kids participate in high school, and then came back and started coaching.
Well, and you're still involved, aren't you, with track, refereeing and so on?
Yeah, starting,
Starting.
yeah, firing a gun.
So that seems scary. Tell me what it's.
Well, you had asked for interesting stories a while ago,
Right.
and I'll tell one. I spent, before I came to Addison Trail, I was at the University of Illinois, and I was working in the educational placement office, running that, and I would go out and talk to senior classes of students who were getting ready to do their student teaching and getting ready to go out and get a job. So my job was to tell them how to go about getting a job. And so when I was down there, I had season tickets to University of Illinois basketball games. I watched Rick Howlett play basketball. He was a very, very good basketball player. And so I knew who he was. He didn't know me from Adam at that time. So I'm teaching this, or I go to this senior class, and I'm making this presentation, and here's Rick Howlett sitting in the back row. And I go, whoa. So I'm giving it my all, telling these college seniors how to go about getting a job. And about 3/4 of the way through, I look back, and here's Mr. Howlett, sound asleep. Now, the moral of the story is I was a pretty boring presenter, and he already had a job. But the irony of it is, I got to know him when I came to Addison Trail, because he was there, and 10 years later, I make him my head basketball coach.
When you went in to evaluate him in the classroom, was he ever sleeping?
No, he was a very good teacher. And I stayed awake in the back of the room, I want you to know.
You did. I remember that. Yes.
So I thought that was just kind of interesting.
Tell me what it's like as an administrator to have, because I know the atmosphere in a school changes in years when you have some good athletic teams, and the team keeps getting better as the year goes on. What's it like as an administrator? Maybe both of you can talk a little bit about that. And when we have athletics is doing well in a school.
I think it just makes it more exciting. I really do believe AT was a terrific place to work and for kids to go to school. So it was always interesting, and I think it was always positive. But when you're winning, I think that makes a difference. I remember when the basketball team, for example, was rated, I think, number 5 in the state, or maybe even higher, maybe 1 or 2.
In that game we played against Leiden.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you go to the gym, and that night it's packed. I mean, it's absolutely full, and kids talk about it all week. Same thing with wrestling. When we won the state, coming back and having that pep rally, we moved all the kids out in the gym. It was just very, very exciting. It just makes everybody a little happier. It's just a positive experience.
Jim,
And I was athletic director, and I mean, the kids are so excited, and the coaches, what can you say? I mean, Fred Dennis had how many championships between the boys and girls gymnastics, and Tony Parks with 2 state championships and a runner-up, and then Paul Parpet with 2 runner-ups to the state football title. It just changes the whole atmosphere of the school. The kids are all excited. You don't have the discipline problems. They're really involved and respect one another and respect the athletes. And so it's just a total difference.
and all of those, as I said before, the coaches were all teachers, so they had to do their responsibility as a teacher. And they, as I recall, they had full loads, didn't they? They taught as many classes as any other teacher. And generally, those teachers, well, I shouldn't say generally, the coaches were very well respected by the students, having them as a classroom teacher.
One thing early on, and you guys will remember this, that the letterman, you're talking about the athletes being respected. The letterman used to do a lot of basically the disciplining. They would be in the hallways and discipline. They would do any number of things to maintain discipline. I can remember I was senior class sponsor. We got a little place up behind the balcony. It was a senior place. We had a Coke machine. A letterman was in there to maintain that place every period of the day.
Well, and as you mentioned to me off camera or at a preparation session for this, the lettermen used to be in the halls. If they had a free period, they'd be in the halls keeping some calm and peace in the hallways in the early days.
Right.
I mean, later on, probably for legal reasons and so on, the hall monitors and so on came in. But in the beginning, it was pretty well, which is again says something about the school,
Right.
that the students respected each other.
Good leadership training to get the kids ready for, what's going to happen after high school. That's good training. They're showing other kids how to behave and making sure that they do.
Well, are there any other stories that you want to share with us about the athletic area? Or we're going to have to move on to a couple other sections for AT, but we're getting close to hitting all the areas.
Well, you can ask these guys over, the athletic director over, when I became the track coach, we had a cinder track, and every year they'd say, what equipment can I get for you? I said, all-weather track and all-weather track, and finally we got one.
Were you still coaching?
Yes. And they asked me, how many lanes do you want? 8, which is normal, and there was 7 schools in the conference at the time, and he said, 8 lanes would be narrower, but 7 lanes we can make them wider. I said, there's only 7. AT still has a 7-lane track,
Yeah.
which is probably the only one in the state.
I think the other thing that administratively, the support that the school from the district office on down, the facilities were always well maintained. Improvements every year. It just they're there, and they were very well supported by the community, and you thank the.
Well, another thing
the
that I
district
think
for
we
that.
have to give credit to is the support staff. I mean, a
yes.
school really cannot function, with just the teachers and just the coaches and so on. There's the maintenance people, there's the people in the cafeteria, there's the vendors that come in to service the building or to give us supplies. I think Addison Trail always went for the best, and people were proud of it.
And some of the ones that were hired were there for many, many, many years. Mrs. Groove, for example, was
Yeah.
the scheduler for
Right
Kevin
from the
and
start.
for me for all those years. She did an outstanding job.
Right.
Mrs. Chow and Nelda Milanese and all those
All those
were
clerical
just,
staff.
they stayed. It was a nice place to be, and they were very good at what they did.
Right. And I think it was mentioned earlier about special needs students. There's the teachers that did all the work in special needs, but in most cases they had a support staff too. And
Right.
and as you mentioned earlier, the students respected those other students, when they were in the halls and when they were in the library and in the cafeteria. I think they felt a big part of the school.
Well, even the audiovisual guy, when he first, I can't even remember
Chuck
his name
Citrano?
anymore. But no, before him. He'd come out on the field and he'd tape. Tape. It was filmed at that time, Super 8, and but they would do anything that they weren't called upon to do. They didn't have to do, and they'd come out and help.